I was born as Stephen or Steve Wexler in Manhattan, 1928, and a family which was pretty leftist. I was what they call a red diaper baby. I was a radical from the start. And growing up during the Depression, it was hard for an intelligent person not to be, but I was. At Harvard, I got friendly with another leftist who came from Chicago, and towards the end of the summer he said, you're a red, aren't you? And I said, why do you ask? He said, well, if you're a red, sign this. And he brought out a piece of paper. I looked at, what's this? For membership in the Communist Party. And I thought, my God, do we have to join? And I thought also, what could this mean for a future career if that ever comes out? Things were already, the Cold War was already beginning, even before the Second World War had ended. So that being a leftist was already somewhat taboo. It got much, much, much worse in the years that followed.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it.
I signed up, gave him 50 cents, I was in. And that, of course, had a great effect on my whole life. The Korean War started, 1950, and I got drafted. And when you were drafted, you had to sign a statement, a paper saying, I am not and have never been a member of the above organizations. And there were about over 100 left-wing organizations, most of them long gone, but some of them not. And I had been, or still was, in about a half a dozen at least. The question was, should I sign or shouldn't I? And since anybody who was in any of these organizations was committed by a recent law to sign up with the police as a foreign agent, which of course nobody did because I wasn't. I didn't do it. But the penalty for not signing was an amazing up to $10,000 and 5 years in prison for every day you didn't sign. That meant after a week, 35 years, after 2 weeks, 70 years, and it's already 6 months. This law. So that I was damned if I did and damned if I didn't sign this statement. And we were rushed through, and if even hesitating, I would stand out. So in the end, I signed it. I figured maybe if I keep my mouth shut for 2 years, I can get out without their noticing. I had great luck. Half our unit was sent to Korea, into the war, and my half, luckily, was sent to West Germany, to the Bavarian Alps.
The problem now is future peace. That is your job in Germany.
Before my 2 years were up, there were about 5-6 months left. In August 1952, I got a letter from Washington, from the Pentagon, saying, you signed this statement although you were in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I thought, my God, 5 years in military prison, that could be fatal. So that's when I decided to defect. We were not too far from the East German border, but I figured, I don't know the area there. If I start wandering around in the woods and get picked up, it'll be even worse. So I was looking for a place where it was a sharp, clean-cut division. And the one I found was in Austria, was then still divided into 4 zones. And the separation between the American zone and the Soviet zone was the Danube River, near the city of Linz. So I went to Linz. It got there in the evening. I couldn't ask anybody directions. How do I get to the Danube River? Because they would have said, what is an American in uniform looking for the Danube River for? So I had to search around. I figured it would be easy to find. It wasn't. So I looked and looked and looked, and finally I did find the Danube. And I threw my shoes away, threw my nice new camera away, threw my jacket away so as not to be drawn down by the current. So I swam across it. When I got across, I expected to see Soviet, if not tanks, at least men with machine guns all along. That was the Iron Curtain. I couldn't find anybody. And I finally was picked up by the Austrian police. I said only to the Soviets. So I was taken to them, and the Soviets took me the next morning to their headquarters in Austria, which was near Vienna, and brought me into a cell, which was not a nice cell. It was in the cellar. It was barred. There was a guard in front. There wasn't a bed. There was just sort of a platform with bedding, a table and a chair and a light bulb. And obviously they were trying to figure out what to do with me. And towards the end they said, okay, we're going to take you away from here. You won't stay here anymore. And brought me arranged to bring me a whole new set of clothing. He measured my foot with a pencil on paper. I didn't know that. Being a New Yorker, we had these machines, these sort of things where you measure a foot. Yeah. But here, with a pencil around, and it worked. He brought me shoes, and for you, he said, a red tie. And he wrote a red tie. He said, you're leaving tomorrow. After a good night's drive and half a day's drive, we reached the border to the GDR, to East Germany. And they took me up to Potsdam, near Berlin, and locked me up again. I have a visitor, this Soviet guy who spoke almost perfect American, who visited about once a week. And among other things, I said to him, maybe I should change my name so as not to damage my family, that they'd not get in trouble because of me. He said, good, think up a new name. And after 3 weeks when he came back, he said, did you think of a name? I said, no, I still didn't. He said, well, what about Victor Grossman? I didn't like it a bit, but since I hadn't thought of anything, and also perhaps because in the name Grossman, I could have called myself Murphy or Johnson, but I didn't want to cut completely my roots as Jew. Jewish roots, and Grossman is both German and a Jewish name.
Were you worried about being in Germany? I mean, especially so soon after the Holocaust?
No, not really. I didn't even think of it, frankly. It didn't occur to me. I figured I'm in left-wing East Germany. I didn't even think of it. And I might mention that before I was here very long, I saw one of the old-fashioned black locomotives, steam locomotives. They were still in use, and one came into the station where I was, and written on it in big white letters, "Free the Rosenbergs." That was this couple, Jewish couple, who were executed for espionage. In her case, certainly unjustifiably. With him, you could argue about it, but in any case, it was known that they were Jewish, and to see that in Germany was a symbol for me, a good symbol. In all the years I was in the GDR, I think the number of times I even heard an anti-Semitic phrase could be counted on one hand. The streets were named after people who had been murdered by the Nazis. Schools were named after them. And as I gradually got into the culture more, at first I spoke German, but I still wasn't really up to it. But I found the books, anti-fascist books, anti-fascist films, anti-fascist plays. The whole anti-Nazi spirit was pervasive of the whole country. There were, of course, people who were not convinced, who were still fascist in their ideology. But those people kept their mouths shut. First, I should mention that I was able to spend 4 years at college in Leipzig studying journalism. So that made me the only person in the world with a diploma from Harvard and from the Karl Marx University, which it was still called. It's not now. So I'll keep this honor. But after graduating college, there are 4 years in Leipzig, I came to Berlin. I got a job with this little bulletin put out by an English journalist who had been a prominent journalist. He'd worked for Reuters and big jobs, but he'd also fought in Spain in the Civil War. And he put out this bulletin, which partly told about the GDR in a favorable light because it was published in East Berlin, but also about half of it was about the Nazis in West Germany. Once I began working there, I started doing a lot of research and found that the entire diplomatic corps in West Germany were old Nazis. The entire military leadership were old generals and admirals. The entire staff of judges and prosecutors, or almost the entire, by far the largest part, were old Nazis who had condemned people to death for listening to BBC, for example, or for helping a Jew escape, or for otherwise an offense. They were still in charge. And the same helped for the police. The police departments were full of people who had worked for the Gestapo. despite lots of problems and difficulties, these are the things which kept me favoring the GDR. I paid a tax every month. Every medical care was free. More important still, no one feared losing a job. Everyone had work. There's more work around than they could manage. And no one feared being evicted, because evicting people from an apartment was forbidden. If they didn't pay their rent for 2-3 years, they might be thrown out, but only if another apartment was found for them, a cheaper one. The goal seemed to me a good goal, which was achieved almost completely abolishing poverty. In exchange for that, I was not happy about the repression, but at the same time, weighing things, I found this was a move forward.
Did you feel that you were being watched, though?
I assumed that an American in the GDR would probably be watched in some way. At least they'd be asking people about me, and of course they did, as I know. I was one of the few people who never put one foot into West Berlin because I was afraid. And as the GDR was ending, I didn't know what would happen to me, whether the new government, basically the West German government, would send me back to the army where I'd serve a sentence. In fact, I started looking around where I might go to. And I tried several. Cuba looked as if it were going to die very soon. The eastern countries were all going down the drain anyway. North Korea didn't seem so attractive. In any case, I did nothing, and they did nothing. I just became another foreign resident of Germany, so nothing happened to me. But in 1994, a lawyer helping me in Washington telephoned to say, you can come back now, so that without prison sentence. She said maybe the first or second night, perhaps, but after that you'll be free. And so I risked it, and I went back to the States in 1994. And I got my passport after some weeks and have been able to travel back and forth ever since.
And do you vote in the elections then?
Yes, I vote in the elections.
Yeah.
New York State.
Do you miss the GDR?
Yes, I do, despite everything. Or let me put it this way, not that I miss it. Everybody misses their younger years in a way, but I still am bitter about its downfall. In the GDR, when I saw a building being constructed, whether it was a school or homes or whatever, I had the feeling, that's mine too. It belongs also to me. It's part of, when I see a building being constructed these days, I can only wonder who's making money on it. That's a big difference. I would sort of divide up the East Germans. About 1/3 are living a good deal better than before, about 1/3 are living more or less the same level, and about 1/3 who are doing much worse. And depending on whom you talk to, you find more or less nostalgia about the old days.